All right, Jack, my understanding is you'll be there till about 11.
That's correct.
Okay, Steve, do you want to take a look at the agenda here and see where we need to potentially move things around?
The approval of minutes will require a vote and a quorum. And then we had further down the agenda some small changes to board operating policies that we wanted to take care of today so that we would have a full, complete, updated manual in case there's new board members beginning in July. And so that one is later on. If we could, item 6, if you could move that up, you'd need a vote and a quorum for that one. The rest of them, items on the agenda, may not require a vote.
Okay. But clearly, Ryan's first presentation is important, right? Ryan Frost?
Yes.
Yeah. So that one was lost. Okay. Well, let's take a look at the minutes of the previous meeting in your packet and entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Are there any comments or corrections? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor of adopting the minutes, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, no. And they are adopted. All right, Tim, is Tim? Yep. Oh, they are. We'll jump up. Item number 6 will be next on the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Tim Valencia, Deputy Director for the Left Planetary Retirement Board. This is item number 6 on your agendas and in your materials, board operating policies. This is I'll go as far to call it more of a housekeeping item. We have some proposed changes to look at. The key to this is just making sure that your operating policies and procedures actually match practices that the board have, and as was mentioned, that with the potential of new board members, it's a good time to make sure that these are updated. There are 2 operating rules or policies that we've seen some opportunities to make some improvements on or updates on. There is Rule 7 regarding expenses. In particular, in this case, what has to do with travel-related expenses that are always tied to education. And then Rule 9, which is our process for considering new benefit proposals. So first, let's talk about Rule 7. Currently, the key part of Rule 7 that we're talking about, where it says that legislators' travel expenses shall be paid by the member's legislative body. Now, this was put in place at the very beginning of the board, and at that time, when this was proposed by a legislative member, the legislative rules were such that all the expenses that would have been incurred would have been paid by the legislative body. So it was sought to have that clarified in the rule that that's how those expenses would be handled rather than the board having that exposure. Since then, it's come to our knowledge that the legislative rules have changed, and in the meantime, there have been other things put in place like out-of-state travel freezes, things of that nature. So the rule as it applies now in the legislature is that payment for non-legislative travel expenses are approved by the legislature on a case-by-case basis. So they're not always going to be approved. And the way the Rule 7 was written in your operating procedures, there is no authorization for the board to pay those expenses if they were turned down by the legislature. Thus, a legislative board member may be excluded from certain travel expense reimbursement if they were traveling, in particular for trustee education, which is something that this board values highly and does encourage. So the proposed change for Rule 7 then is to allow legislative board members to be paid by the board for travel expenses if not being paid for by their legislative body. So for Rule 9, now Rule 9 is our process for presenting new benefit or looking at new benefit proposals. The current rule includes 3 types of reports. As you know, we have a 3-report process, an initial, preliminary, and final process to consider any particular issue before it will be recommended as a piece of legislation. As the board has developed its processes and gotten deeper and deeper into the levels of analysis it does, some new report types have emerged that are not reflected in the policy. So in particular, what we've been calling the educational briefing, which represents a category of report when we're providing just information. It's not something that's intended to become legislation. That's not what it's being looked at, and we've called it something different than our other process so that there wasn't any conflict or misunderstanding of whether or not something was going to be intended as legislation. The other piece that has come up is what we've been calling the follow-up report, that it's really a sub-step within our 3-step process. Normally would happen at the 2nd step, that before moving something to the final proposal stage, there's a need for additional information that needs to be reconsidered. So we've been calling those just follow-up reports. Like, for example, something would be a preliminary, more additional questions and information would be sought after. We would then do a follow-up report, and that information would be needed before consideration to a final report might be given. So that's a change in the process that's not currently reflected in the rules. So this the proposed changes is looking to make sure that the actual practices of the board match the written procedure. So the proposed changes, one adds actually the educational briefing as a new report type in the process. And it would explain in the what's included in an educational briefing. We've also added the follow-up as a part of the process or as a type within the process and explained what the role that plays. The other change that we've looked at is, in terms of trying to make an improvement here, is changing the title of the 2nd step. Currently, that's called the preliminary report. Some of the feedback that we've gotten at times is that title almost suggests that it's not as complete of set of information as it could be, that it's a preliminary thing. It's not really near enough to being finished or final. So we were looking for a title that was much more reflective of the level of information in that report. So the comprehensive title is being recommended. And I'll remind you that in the process that the initial is just a basic background information to introduce you to a topic, to let you decide whether or not it's something that the board wants to explore further. Then that 2nd stage, the preliminary, now comprehensive, that is where if the board is looking at it further, that's where we provide a much deeper background and research element. We provide policy options and pros and cons, and so it's a much more complete package of information than what preliminary suggests. So that's the basis behind recommending a comprehensive report. So those are the proposed changes for Rule 9. So the options then here before you. You can adopt the changes as proposed for both Rule 7 and 9. You could do just 7 and not 9, just 9 and just 7 if there's one of those that you're not comfortable with making proposals on, or do not adopt any of the changes and leave the process as it exists. Any questions?
Tim, I'm just looking through the operating policy here, just looking at what current Rule 9 and proposed Rule 9, and trying to figure out what the differences are here. So, register. Can you walk me through this?
Well, the register element of that's not being changed at all in the
Right.
Rule 9. That is something that does exist. What we maintain a list of items that come to the board as recommendations for studying, whether it comes from a board member, an idea that staff members come up with, something that comes from a constituent. That we keep a list of those items and we maintain that list, and that's part of what is like for our interim planning discussion, that many of those ideas came from that register that we maintain for keeping track of ideas as they come to board, so that we don't utilize them or we don't lose them. If something isn't examined or it's not something that the board does wish to work forward, then that drops off the active list after 2 years.
Okay, Steve, this might be better directed towards you, but do we have, or number one, I don't think we have, but an active list, registered list? I mean, I know there's one that exists out there, but we don't get a copy of it like at each one of the board meetings. I know we haven't met for 5 or 6 months, but I guess I'm suggesting maybe if we had one like ongoing items on the register list so that we're aware of things that have been brought to us.
We've got, we use the register list in a couple of different ways. There's the board list, and you'll see that, a stripped-down version of that in your materials, where we're talking about possible future items or future agenda items in the calendar thing. So if you were to look, for instance, behind tab 9, you'll see that there's different topics that are already plugged in for the year, and that's one area where that. Then there are other topics that is more sort of like for the staff, in the sense of we may hear about something brewing in another state, municipal bankruptcies. So then it's like, well, how would that affect us? And so these are things that we're working on or talking amongst ourselves or gathering information as it comes to us, so that inside the office, the left hand and the right hand, it's like, oh, did you hear about this? Whereas that is not a topic, for instance, that's ever come before the board or hasn't come up in Washington. If it did come up, we would already have some stuff gathered, and we'd be able to explain to you why the Washington State Constitution doesn't allow municipalities to declare bankruptcy. The only exception would be a few little districts that don't employ left members. So that level, if you wanted to see that more comprehensive list of things that haven't ever come before the board, like municipal bankruptcies, and there's those things that we're just trying to stay on top of in case they do pop up, we could provide that list to you.
Okay.
We don't want, we try as staff to be prepared and to respond to things as they come up, but we don't want to be kind of seen as pushing things. So it's like so for instance, if we put out a list of stuff that's got whatever, merger, for instance, would be on the list, then it's like, oh, is that, then that creates, municipal bankruptcy. Nobody's going to be fired up about that being on the list. But there are topics on the list, then it might be, oh, well, what does that mean? And so we're trying to be sensitive to not looking like we're trying to suggest possible topics for you to work on just because we're staying informed or prepared in case that issue happens to come up in Washington. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. All right.
Any questions for Tim? Okay, the options available to you are listed. Entertain a motion. Go ahead,
Sure,
Mark.
I move we adopt option number 1, changing both Rule 7 and second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to adopt proposed changes to Rule number 7 and Rule number 9. Further discussion? Okay, seeing and hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, no. And that action is confirmed. Thank you, Tim. All right, we'll move on now to identified agenda item number 2. Mr. Neal.
Okay, bear with me for a minute, I'll get this set up.
By way of introduction, I think you all received the email about Paul joining staff. This is his first meeting. Just as a reminder, since it's been 6 months, Paul's got an extensive background with pensions here in the state of Washington, has worked for the legislature, worked for the Department of Retirement Systems. 20-plus years ago, he encouraged me to get into pensions. He's been around even longer than I have, and adding him to the team has been a real. He was able to hit the ground running and be a real, particularly during session. So, thank you, Paul. And then,
Thanks, Steve. Morning, members of the committee, Mr. Chairman. I have spent some time working for the Transportation Committee, where there's always been a female chair, so if I call you Madam Chair, don't take it personally.
I'm not sure how to take that, but thank you.
Just, you know. Okay, so my first presentation here is on the legislative update. The original intention of this was to be a wrap-up of the legislative session. As you know, that's not possible today because the legislative session isn't over, so this is more of a status report for what's going on in progress. So what I've done is set this up as a timeline to kind of walk through what's happened during session, and you'll notice that there's no end of session note on that timeline. But what we have done is set the bills we're going to talk about into 5 different categories. Plan funding, left 2 board bills, the select committee request bill, other pension bills, and other bills of interest, which in this session are workers' compensation bills. So plan funding, this is the most interesting part of the conversation and the most speculative because the budget is not done yet. But we think we can talk about some of the stuff that's been going on that's of interest to the board. In all versions of the budget that have been passed by both the House and the Senate, the contribution rates that you've passed have been fully funded. So looks like that is going to be what this final budget's going to have. That's good news. The ombudsman position that you had requested, it's funded in the House budget, but not in the Senate budget. It's a little bit ambiguous because as an unappropriated agency, nothing in either budget bill has anything about the left 2 board. So where we have to drill down to is in the agency detail. And so the agency detail report in the House has the ombudsman. In the Senate, it still doesn't as of the last Senate budget passed on the 8th. We remain hopeful that the final budget will include that piece. So, but we won't know until hopefully the end of this month. Hopefully we won't find out in July. The other piece is the alternate revenue payment. And just for a little bit of background, that was passed in 2008, I believe. And the way the statute is set up, there's a series of subsections where if the target is hit, there's going to be a set payment paid at different times. So what both the House and the Senate budget have done is taken that statute, amended it by pulling out the subsection that provides for a payment in 2013. So the good news, the silver lining, is that the statute is still there, and prospective future payments are still on the table. But so far, it looks like it's not going to happen in 2013. But again,
Sure.
The budget isn't finished yet. So
Okay.
Hey, Paul, did we hit the targets?
we did this time, yes.
So this was, as I recall, this was related to interstate monies coming in through internet purchases and stuff. Originally, that's how that bill was crafted. Is no longer attached to that. It's just targets for revenue.
yes, it was, originally targeted towards income,
Right.
sales tax.
That was
Yeah.
the rationale. But
Yeah.
we hit the revenue target.
Yeah.
Right, and so if the statute weren't amended, then.
We would be getting something.
Yes, except that the way the statute's written, the payment is subject to appropriation. So the way the statute's written, it's not an ironclad, yes, the legislature has to do this, but.
Right. Huh.
But yeah, if the statute had not been amended, then presumably the payment would be being made, and I think it's 20 million this, would have been
10.
10.
5 to the local public safety enhancement account.
Yeah.
and then the other half to left plan 2.
Boy, if you guys
Improvement
pull
account.
that one off, that'll be really cool. I mean, that's quite a deal. So it's always subject to appropriation each time through, that's how.
The way the statute's written, yes. The next issue, these are left Plan 2 board. I called them bills, even though you actually had one official bill, but there was a second one that came up during session that sort of counts as a left board bill. The first one is the Healthcare Authority Technical Corrections Bill that was brought to you last interim by the Healthcare Authority. That bill made it through the House, got through committee in the Senate, and then died in Senate rules. So that isn't going to happen this year. The other bill, which I'll be talking about in more detail in the Medicare update later in the agenda, is House Bill 1868. Basically, this was something that the board didn't have a chance to look at last year because the issue didn't come up until January after session had already started. But you'll remember a few years back, the board had sponsored a policy initiative to provide for reimbursement of medical expenses for catastrophic disability retirees. And it turned out that the way the statute was written, there was an unintended gap in that coverage, and somebody fell in the gap. So that's basically what 1868 was about, was to fix that. And that bill was passed and signed by the governor. So now catastrophic disability retirees will receive that reimbursement. The language in the statute does limit it to the COBRA amount that the person would have gotten had they still been on COBRA. In this particular case, Win Loyland, the gentleman that this happened to, he was on COBRA, and then his COBRA expired, and there was no other program available for him to jump onto, so there was no mechanism for reimbursement. So that's now been fixed. The next is the Select Committee request bills, or bill, I should say. There was a retiree return to work bill, and this was basically another cleanup bill. In 2011, one of a seemingly never-ending series of retiree return to work bills was passed by the legislature, and there were a couple of apparently unintended consequences that I think overly restricted, or at least the view is these overly restricted the rules. And the intent of this bill was to fix that. It was made it through committee in both the House and Senate, and did not make it out of rules. So that is still out there, and no doubt will come back again.
Paul, did that have a fiscal note?
I don't believe it did, but I'm
So it
not
was a no-cost bill and it still didn't get passed?
Let me check. Dave, no fiscal note. Yeah, it was a no-cost bill, and so, but it didn't make it out of rules in either house.
But it got through the fiscal committees?
Yeah, it got through the committees, but then died in rules. Why that is, I can't really tell you, but there are some other pension bills, and these, there were two different excess compensation bills that came out, and these bills grew out of the work that was done last interim by both the Select Committee and the Washington State Institute of Public Policy on pension issues and excess compensation. As you probably remember, this was sort of driven by some overtime concerns. So Senator Bailey put in an excess compensation bill 5392. That bill would have required an excess compensation billing to employers if the final average salary was more than 150% more of what had been in the prior period, which in left 2 would be a 5-year period. That bill made it through committee, died in rules, and then the proposal showed up again in 5916. Toward the genesis of this bill, I'm sure you all remember there were a series of newspaper articles during session about Left 1 disability and retirement issues, and partially in response to that, 5916 had a provision in it that would have allowed local governments presumably to appeal determinations of medical benefits for Left 1 members to the Department of Retirement Systems. And as part of that bill, the excess compensation provision was put on there again, although in this version, the limitation was dropped to 125% rather than 150%. Both of those bills were heard, but did not pass out of the Senate, and so never made it over to the House. And presumably, that's over with for the session. The other bills that I think are of interest, although they specifically excluded Left Plan 2, was this move to potential defined contribution plan, what they were calling the Public Employee Savings Plan. And there were two different bills on that. Make sure I get these numbers right. 5851 was Senator Bailey's bill, and that would have provided for new hires to go into a new defined contribution plan. They were calling the Public Employee Savings Plan. It would have been an option, though, and Plan 3 would have been the default option for somebody coming in as a new employee. The other bill took a little bit more aggressive stance, 5856, and it would have mandated all current employee, or excuse me, all new hires would have been mandated into the defined contribution plan, and all current employees who are less than age 45 would have been mandated into the new defined contribution plan. Both of those bills were heard, but I don't believe either one was passed out of committee. It certainly didn't make it to the Senate floor. Other bills of interest, and again, these are workers' compensation bills, which to date haven't made it through. 5124 changed benefit eligibility requirements, and I think the general tenor of these bills was to somehow get a handle on workers' comp costs, because there's some big bills in the offing, as I understand it. So 5124 made it through the committee, didn't get out of Senate rules. 5125, which would have amended the definition of occupational disease, that didn't get a hearing. The bill that I think is still alive at this point is 5127, and the reason it's still alive is it's part of the package of policy bills that the Senate Majority Coalition has said we need to have, or had said earlier at least, we need to have in order to have a budget deal. It's not clear whether that's still on the table or not, but we'll find out in the next couple of weeks, I guess. 5127, what that does is it lowers the age for the cash out of workers' compensation claim. There was a bill passed a couple of years ago where if you were 55 or older, you could just get a cash out of your, I believe, your time loss claim. And what 5127 would propose is to lower that age to 40. It has passed the Senate twice. It has been ignored by the House twice, and is now back in Senate, was sent back to Senate rules. As you know, that happens when the new session starts. All the bills that are in the go back to the House of Origin. The Senate now has it on third reading. So whether the Senate's going to pass it again or not, we'll find out in the next couple of weeks. And that's all my prepared remarks. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Glenn?
On going back to the more aggressive public employee savings plan, the age 45 mandatory, was that of all plans?
No, not for left two, but I think the plans that were covered were PERS and TERS and SERS. And I'm not sure if PCERS was covered or not.
So let me just make sure I know that we don't need to delve into it, but I want to make sure I understand that content. So they were proposing to take current defined benefit members and force them into a defined contribution plan for the remainder of their time.
Yes, if they were under age 45.
All right.
Mark?
Yeah, I have a question on the catastrophic disability, the reimbursement. You said that was tied to the COBRA rates, so potentially each employer would have a different rate, and that's how those folks would be reimbursed, depending upon what their employer would charge them in essence for COBRA?
Right. As I understand it, there was a desire to make sure that it wasn't just an open-ended cost. It would be just go out and get whatever insurance you want, we'll pay for it. So they had to link it to something, and the thing they linked to was COBRA. But you're right, that's going to vary by employer. And also, if the person's going out and getting insurance on their own, there's a pretty good chance that it's going to be more expensive than COBRA. So there's going to be probably a gap there in the premium.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions for Paul? All right, thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Well, Paul, I'm glad you've got all your stuff out of there, but we've just decided that it might be nice segue that you had there and go right straight to item number 8 on the Medicare briefing. And might remind you, it's chairman.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, sir. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Again, I'm Paul Neal, committee staff, and this is Medicare briefing. Again, this is a follow-up on the work that came out of House Bill 1868 that I already talked about. Going back to where this started, in the 2009 interim, this committee did quite a bit of work on this issue of providing medical coverage for catastrophically disabled left two members after retirement. The issue, one of the issues that came out of that was there was this policy desire to do that, but there was also a competing balancing thing. If you want to make sure you've got some kind of control on the costs that aren't just saying, go out and get insurance and we'll pay for it. So the balance that was struck by the board was to provide it as a reimbursement. And in doing that reimbursement, the bill proposed by the board and passed by the legislature identified sources where post-retirement medical could be provided for a retiree, and then cited those in the bills. The first one is COBRA, that essentially pretty much everybody gets for 18 months and potentially 29. And then there's employer-provided post-retirement medical. And again, in most cases, this is not the employer paying. This is just allowing the retiree to remain in the risk pool and self-pay their premium as part of the risk pool and have a somewhat lower premium that way. That varies by employer. It's usually a bargain issue. And then there's Medicare, which for anybody who was first hired after April of 1986, they would have to be in Medicare. So that was thought that covered the waterfront pretty well. What we discovered in January was that there was a group of employees who don't have any of those, or at least once their COBRA runs out, they don't have any of them. And again, this was, you've heard of Win Loyland, who ended up, 1868 was named after him. He was a Left 2 firefighter, was injured on duty, catastrophically disabled. After his COBRA ran out, they found out that his employer didn't provide post-retirement medical, and he did not have Medicare because he was in a group of people that was first employed prior to April of '86 and had been continuously employed since that time. So as part of that process of dealing with 1868, legislative staff reached out to DRS and the Actuary's office and this staff, because we had done a lot of the groundwork in getting this put together, to try to figure out how big this group of people was. And what we found out, mostly with the help of DRS, was trying to figure out, like, how big is this group of people. So we started out with here. By definition, this has got to be people who've been continuously employed with the same employer since before April of '86. And so we started with that group of people, and then of those, how many had no employer Medicare prior to '86? And Medicare is tied to Social Security. Roughly, from earlier research by the board, about half of firefighters have Social Security, about half of law enforcement officers, and only about 10% of firefighters. So came up with a solid number of 600. And then we're unsure if the employer provided Medicare pre-86 for another 420. That number got peeled back a little bit because there was, I believe it was in 2009, there was a divided referendum process that was authorized where an employer could allow non-Medicare employees to opt into Medicare, and about 44 did that, so that dropped it down. I've got a question mark in the last box because the thing we don't really know is if members that fall into this category otherwise might have 40 quarters of Social Security employment elsewhere. So what we came up with was about 1,000 folks out of this process who were potentially covered, and then applying the assumptions about disability, catastrophic disability incurrence, we came up with about one person every 3 years would have been potentially affected, would have been potentially fallen outside the scope of the original bill. The Actuary's office did a fiscal note on that and identified a cost, but it wasn't enough to affect rates, and the bill was passed and signed by the governor. There are a couple of issues with the costing. Any time you're doing a fiscal note, you can pretty much guarantee that the number is going to be wrong because it's an estimate. And so, in keeping with good practice, I think we erred on the side of over-inclusion, so that we didn't understate the cost, so the cost wasn't understated. I think the biggest problem was that we weren't able to reliably identify employees whose employer provided post-retirement medical. Now, we did a survey back in 2005 that asked and answered that question, so we had data, but that was old enough that it really just wasn't reliable enough to use for fiscal analysis. But certainly of those 1,000 people identified, some of them are going to have employer-provided post-retirement medical, so they would drop off the list. We just don't know how many. We didn't have a reliable estimate, so we didn't want to go with a potentially misleading number. Another issue with the identification of these folks is that, by definition, you're talking about firefighters and law enforcement officers who've been at the job at least 27 years, and some certainly more. So that kind of cuts both ways, because in that age group, the probability of service retirement is quite a bit higher. So obviously they take a service retirement and they're no longer part of the group. On the other hand, people in older age brackets have a higher possibility of becoming disabled. So kind of cuts both ways, not sure where that ends up. But I think one thing that is true is that within 10 years, all these folks are going to be retired one way or the other. So there won't be any additional people after that time who would be in need of the provisions of 1868. So there's not really anything you have to do about this. This is just a update because this issue, we didn't have an opportunity to brief you about it before session because it didn't come up. At most, you might want to think about whether you want to update the data so we have more recent data. So if this comes up again, we'd be able to have some better numbers.
So what we're trying to identify is of 1,000 potential, narrow that down to what it really is, and then of them, estimate how many will seek a catastrophic disability.
Right. You get your base number, then apply that percentage.
And your
assumption.
best Kentucky windage on that is a couple a year.
Yeah, well, right now it's about 1 every 3 years, given the
That's
1,000
right,
number.
1 every
So
3
if the data from 2005 was still accurate and roughly about half of employers provided post-retirement medical, then maybe that would become 1 every 5 or 6 years. But in either case, it's not enough to affect rates.
I have a question about employer-provided post-retirement medical insurance. I'm aware of a number of groups that through their collective bargaining agreement with their employer, the unions have actually taken over the provision of medical insurance. So I'm wondering if that would qualify. So the number of groups out there have union trusts that actually manage the health care for their employees. Would that qualify? Would those people qualify for employer-provided post-retirement medical insurance?
That would be actually subject to whatever the agreement was. For instance, in Wynn's case, that's exactly what had happened, but the medical, didn't allow retirees to continue to be a part of it.
That particular trust didn't allow that
Yes.
functionality? Okay.
Yeah, so that would be sort of, depending on how it was set up, whether or not retirees were allowed to continue in it or not.
But if the trust allowed that, then
Yes.
they would qualify under the employer-provided?
Yes.
Okay.
As long as it's something that was bargained for with the employer,
Okay.
that the employer agreed to.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
And in continuing on this theme of musical agenda, we're going to go to item number 7 and ask Ryan to. So just for those that are keeping track, we're going to go from item number 7 to 4 to 3.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Ryan Frost. I'm the Research Analyst 1 for the board, and today I am presenting a follow-up to the WSIPI study presented to us at our December board meeting.
Ryan, I'm sorry, brief point of introduction. I should have dove into this while you were coming up. Many of you remember Ryan was joined the board at the end of last year as an intern to help out on with some research and working on a report. Greg Deem has temporarily taken an assignment to help out Mr. Merchant over at the Department of Retirement Systems. And while Greg is over at DRS on this temporary job assignment, Ryan has agreed to fill in. So he'll be with us for at least another couple months. Sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine.
All right. So that's by way of introduction.
Okay, so the WSIP report was their evaluation on 3 topics related to public pension policies. These were benefit levels, portability, and excess compensation. This follow-up is on their benefit levels section. So since retirement plans within each state have various designs and multiple variables. It's extremely difficult to find a single measure to compare plans, which is what Mississippi tried to do. They compared all 50 states and tried to find comparables for fire and police. And recognize that difficulty. They used an apples-apples comparison and chose income replacement as their comparison tool. Income replacement is the percentage of a worker's salary replaced by the pension at the time of their retirement. The challenge with that decision is that judging a plan solely off of its income replacement ratio ignores many aspects of what makes a plan successful. An analysis that includes other measures and expanded analysis will provide a more comprehensive comparison of a plan's adequacy and sustainability. These next two slides provide a list of pertinent data collected by WSIP and a more comprehensive list, which we're going to recommend for the follow-up study. The WSIP data had a chart, and they had multipliers and contribution rates, but what we believe would be a more accurate assessment of a plan's adequacy would be to add a normal retirement age, vesting period, a final average salary period, the average salary for the plan's funded ratio, plan demographics, market value of the plan's assets, as well as other contribution sources. So the next steps would be, does this information meet expectations for the follow-up, or is there anything extra that you guys would like to see added to our list to have a better comparison of the plans?
Can you kick that back to that list?
Yeah.
These were some of the topics that you guys mentioned or that came up in the discussion when the Institute was here presenting their report as other questions that you had. You'll recall they identified 43, peer plans, but just from a glance at that list, for instance, LEOFF 1 was on the list. Hard to consider them a peer plan since they've been closed for so long. State Patrol 1 and 2, are they really a peer plan given that there's only 1,000 members maybe between the two of them combined? Those were some of the questions that came up, and this was our first cut at that, as responding to those questions that you guys had, is screening down that list of 43 peers and trying to get a feel for which ones are more comparable, and then in what other ways are they comparable. I have to admit, it gave me a chuckle. The number one list, for instance, the number one plan on the list for income replacement was actually New Mexico, and it brought to mind for me personally, there's a LEOFF 2 member who transferred here from New Mexico and was very vocal in suggesting to the board and board staff when he first got here about how we need to do what they're doing in New Mexico. And part of the issues there, they had a number of menu of items that you could choose from, but the minimum employer contribution was 16%, in addition to the employee contribution. So that was an example of how, yes, a plan is going to seem quite a bit more generous if you are paying twice as much for it as you're paying for LEOFF 2. It'll look twice as good. The other piece about income replacement, one of the things about, again, was New Mexico. The pension benefits were fairly generous, but the average salary was about $30,000. And so is 3% of $30,000 better than 2% of $80,000? I mean, I'm not answering that question, but that's at least a genuine point of discussion. So that's where things like some of these other things, average salary, the funded ratio got at the issue of if your pension plan is not secure, then how much of a really a comparison is it? None of the statewide plans have had any, or there's any hint of bankruptcy, but I know for a lot of the municipal plans, the funded ratios are such that some of the municipalities are like, it doesn't matter really what your benefits are on paper because you're not going to get paid them. Those were some of the issues that you had mentioned before, and again, it's been 6 months. So we wanted to remind you of that, of what we're moving forward on. These are the issues, the categories. Ryan, Greg, other staff in the office have been contacting, looking at all the websites and the talking to the plans in all of those 43 other plans to try to screen out a little bit more of what these are. And then the idea is we'll bring you some kind of a follow-up later on, and maybe that list of 43 will be down to 20. And in terms of true peers, and then have a more robust comparison in terms of where Left 2 measures up to the remainder of those plans.
Yeah, and I should have mentioned this, but Left 2 is ranked 31 out of 43.
What's a multiplier?
The multiplier is the percentage multiplied by the final average salary
Okay,
and
got
divided
it.
by the years to give the annual benefit.
I think if you're looking at a true benefit analysis for benchmarking purposes and trying to find a peer, are we also looking at those that provide a drop account as well as post-retirement health care? Because they may have a lesser benefit as far as a retirement calculation, but they may have another benefit on the outside that they get in replacement of. So,
Yeah, that's a good point. We'll add that to the list while we're checking, particularly post-retirement medical. That'd make a huge difference.
Are they just doing left plans, or are they doing all?
They did all of them. They broke out the left plans separately, or they called them public safety. And in some cases, it wasn't so much a separate plan as a tier within a broader plan, but they would have a public safety tier. And that's another thing we'd have to look at. Does it include, who's included in that tier? Is it just police and fire, or is it maybe corrections officers or something like that?
And they're asking us for,
No, this is what you guys were asking us for. Mississippi is not doing anything further with it. They were not asked to do any kind of follow-up for the legislature. Their study was referenced quite a bit in the discussion around excess comp. Again, that Ryan's focused on was about this benefit piece, but excess comp was a part of theirs, and they kind of came to the conclusion that, at least on a system-wide basis, there aren't any excess comp issues or spiking issues on a system-wide basis, particularly with respect to overtime. They didn't see anything in the overtime usage pattern for Left 2 or really for any of the other plans that created any funding concerns. But there are still other issues surrounding that. That's where the excess comp bills came out. So their study got referenced in that debate, but that's sort of the end of it.
Yeah, I don't think that the legislature really was going to ask too many more questions when we ranked 31 out of 43.
I was going to say, I mean, is this good enough? Or
For
gonna
their
do-
purposes, I think, but when we got the information on the Mississippi study, we asked these additional questions. And I think from this perspective of all of our base of knowledge, there are important considerations that Mississippi didn't dig as deep, wasn't required to dig as deep for, and these are important questions here that I don't know whether our ranking moves up or further down. I don't know, but it's important information for the level of sophistication, I guess, for the board here to examine some of these for follow-up. I mean, we'll just take it and carry it on from here based off of their baseline study.
You know,
Jeffrey?
when they talk about the income replacement, and we struggled over that to try and find some sort of a single one-dimensional commonality that we could use. And we knew it was going to be nothing more than that, one-dimensional, so we have an index now. When you go back to the panels that Ryan had up here, you have WISIP data, multiplier contribution rate, and additional data, and had about half dozen things, funded ratio, retirement age vesting, this kind of thing. Were those all included in the calculation of what would be a comparable replacement, or are those things in addition to?
In addition to. So for instance, also COLAs were not included in the WISIPI information. They did income replacement at the time of retirement only.
When you talk about that, then it's almost as if this is nothing more than a nominal figure, just dollar for dollar across the board. Ryan brings up a really good point when you talk about what we term as a total package. What do you get for a total package in retirement and the true cost of that? Would we want to adjust the formula and come up with something where we would set out the criteria on this, including medical and other benefits there, that obviously a VEBA, some sort of a trust account, something out there that would indicate truly what a comparable or an income replacement would be, so we'd have some sort of a common index we could use, we could get a hold of here.
That may be an approach. We'll probably bring back some options for you. One option would be to try to come up with still one number, one score, if you will, that you could compare plan to plan. Another thing might be to take more like a report card type approach, where you would have 6 different areas in which you would compare plans, one of which would be income replacement. Another might be the total cost of the plan. So you would see if you've got a plan that costs twice as much as another, you can see why the income replacement is higher. I don't know, but we'll bring those kind of thoughts or possibilities back to you later on this interim, and kind of get some more direction from you in terms of how you want us to proceed with making this comparison more robust than the simple income replacement that was in the initial report.
I have it from the chair that if you're all done talking about this, we get a 10-minute break. I don't have a little hammer, but I think that's official enough.
I did have one other quick question. Are these 43 plans, are they all statewide plans? Or did they include some municipal and or county plans?
As far as I know, they're all statewide plans. Yeah. Some of them, like I said, they have 5 tiers, and so
Sure.
you have to separate them out, because a lot of states you can choose which tier you want to go in. So numbers-wise, those tiers are going to be smaller than left 2, but it's still interesting to see the comparison.
Anything else for Ryan? Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you.
10 minutes, that'd take us to 20 minutes of.
Agenda item number 4, the 2013 interim planning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, Tim Valencia, Deputy Director for the Left 2 Board. This is the 2013 interim planning item on your agenda. So the way we're going to work through this is first a couple of comments about this upcoming interim, and then looking at the items that are on the planning list, and I've categorized them into 3 different areas. There are benefit-related items, actuarial-related items, and then organizational administrative items for you to consider for your interim. So first, about the 2013 interim. As you all know, this is a little bit later start than normal to the interim, given the budgetary situation with session and the extra sessions. So we're getting a much later start this year. We have fewer meetings remaining this interim. So that makes planning a little bit different from the past, because we don't have the entire interim to consider from this point forward. I would ask you to consider that this list really the rough draft of issues for you to consider. These are things that have been discussed in the past, things you have asked for in the past, or things that have popped up from like discussions during legislative session. So these are for presented to you for your discussion on things that you want to move forward, and you will be looking for direction on many of these items. Now, there are some of the items that, as I discuss them, you'll note that, well, for instance, we've covered some of the items today already, and we've projected even possibilities for some future meetings. Some of these items are normal course of business type items, presentations that the board does every year, or other issues that were just informational that, like today was primarily put on informational items that didn't require actions. So we have put some of those forward. But again, this is for your opportunity to discuss how you want to move forward for the remainder of the interim. So first, the list of the benefit items. As you already heard during the legislative hearing, the excess compensation or the salary spiking topic is first on the list, although these are not necessarily in any particular order. This is an item that we have discussed here at the board the last couple of years. There was legislation that came up as Paul discussed. And even though the studies and the data that we've looked at so far don't necessarily show a systematic problem with salary spiking, particularly in LEOFF 2, there are still, as we've mentioned, potential risks in particular. If there is a case or two that does occur, the biggest risk perhaps to LEOFF Plan 2 is the headline risk that can occur. I know over the summer there were some headlines on this particular topic, not necessarily LEOFF 2, but with some LEOFF Plan 1 cases. So that is a risk for the board to be conscious of. This is something that you may want to decide to get ahead of, and it's something that if you get ahead of can affect the board's credibility for being in front of it. As we saw in this session, it's likely that if it's not addressed, that somebody else is likely to address it. The second topic is the 401A defined contribution account. We have mentioned this in the past, that the concept here is that the existing savings methods for members are limited. So, and we know that the pension is only a part of the entire retirement package, so that there needs to be other ways for people to be able to save for their full retirement, be able to afford their health care, and make sure they don't outlive their assets. The IRS has approved some new methodologies in our world, which may provide some opportunities for increasing member savings opportunities, make it more efficient and make it more effective. The 401A defined contribution account would be one of those methods that you may want to look at to help people ensure retirement adequacy. The next item is career change. That title is probably likely familiar for some of you. As you'll recall, in the past, the board did recommend and had passed a career change bill, which provided some our version of retiree return to work, if you will, provided members options to after they retire at their younger normal retirement age, to change careers because they still have a lot of working time, available in their lifetimes. There have been some recent events, as I mentioned, with regards to the salary spiking thing. There were some news articles that brought examination to some cases and brought to light some areas where there could be potential abuses with the career change legislation that was put into place. So this would be an opportunity to address some of those issues and seek to protect the policies that have been recommended from this board. The Medicare educational briefing, as you know, that you've already had that now today. That was intended to come after this presentation, but that one, it was on the list just to have, for the sake of completeness, for June, as the Washington State Institute for Public Policy follow-up, which you have also already heard. Those were on the list, but we've already accounted for those in the June. But for the sake of being able to see the whole picture, we've included those on the list. Hospital districts as employers. This item may be a membership issue, so it may not be something that the board can actually address. That's actually part of the question here, is whether or not it is an issue for the board. So some information needs to be, additional information needs to be gathered to be able to determine if this really is a board issue. As you recall, there was EMT or emergency medical technician legislation passed that allowed them into LEOFF 2. And at the time the EMT legislation was passed, there were questions about whether or not others may get swept up in that, and that was targeted at King County at the time. And in fact, that there has been some that have been swept up, and there are EMTs that are at hospital districts, and while there's questions around the hospital districts as employers, and in some cases there's PERS membership that comes into play. Some districts are employers and have chosen to participate in pensions. Some have not. Some of these members want into the pensions. Some don't want into the pensions. So there's quite a bit of complexity surrounding this particular topic. The scope of this, right now we know there's at least 30 members that are affected, but the potential size may be 100 or 200 members that could get swept up into this. So that's an issue that's been out there, but we've been waiting for information to develop, but it may be an opportunity to look further at that. The last item in the benefits area I referred to as corrections legislation. It may not necessarily be corrections, but that's the best term I had for it at the moment. What we've noticed, or what we've considered, is that there's several agencies, as you've seen, including ourselves, that have had either technical corrections or pieces of legislation that individually we have put forward that have not successfully moved or been passed at the legislature, or issues that just never went forward at all. Of course, like with the healthcare authority legislation that the board signed on to this year, that did not pass. With the select committee, which I know was important to DRS for the retiree return to work fixes, for Left Plan 2, we have the definition of firefighter issue, which we have been discussing over the last couple of years, which we tried as technical corrections, and it was beyond technical corrections, so we had issues moving that forward. And we've talked with OSA about this issue, and it's something that they're interested in if they have any issues to move forward as legislation. The base of this concept here is, rather than trying to run individual pieces out there, actually taking, and what I'd consider an innovative approach, taking a multi-agency approach to adding all these smaller pieces of change into one bill. This is a level of cooperation I don't think we've really seen from this area. So it would be highly efficient and maybe highly effective, and if nothing else, certainly innovative as far as interagency cooperation. So I think there's a lot of potential side benefits as far as our credibility as well for considering something along those lines. So those are things that fall into the benefit realms for your consideration for the remainder of this interim. Turning to actuarial issues. The biggest one on your agenda, and this one is already set on your agenda, as you see, is this is a year for long-term economic assumptions. Again, this reviews every 2 years. So in July, or at the July meeting, you would normally receive a briefing from the actuary's office about long-term economic assumptions, and then in the September-October timeframe, the actuary would present their findings from their examination, and the board would take action if that's appropriate based on the findings to adopt or continue or make any changes to the economic assumptions. The other three items that are on here, this is really kind of a pick-em, if you will. These three topics have been on the potential agenda for a while, and the idea here in terms of the advancing trustee education is improving understanding of actuarial items. That's one of the expectations the board had about getting members up to speed and improving trustee education. For actuarial funding, of course, the funding method determines the way the cost of the plan will be funded over time. In this board, we've actually done a lot of work here. Even though we use an aggregate funding method, you've adopted a temporary funding policy in the normal entry age. And so now is a time where you can take an examination, perhaps of is there a warranted reason to change funding methods? That's something you want to consider. What are the benefits? What are the downsides of these types of questions? So funding method education would aid in that discussion. Smoothing method has come up on several occasions. Of course, we already have an 8-year smoothing method in place, and that's an actuarial tool that phases in the impacts of gains and losses over times, and it's a tool that helps stabilize member and employer contribution rates. It's something that is not, I don't know if it's broadly understood or seen outside even, you know, these committee levels, but it does come into these discussions when we're talking about the plan funding, which is commonly happens with these legislative discussions, trying to help, and even broader, helping the members understand the plan and what goes on with the plan and the funding of the plan and the stability of the plan. Questions had come up in the past about smoothing methods, so we had thought that a comprehensive education about the smoothing method would be appropriate. The last one is the fiscal note pricing. Of course, every time we run up a piece of pension legislation, a fiscal note is attached to it, and they're complicated pieces of information. There's a lot of information on there, and trying to understand how they're actually created, what the numbers actually represent, and how they get used. With all those moving pieces, again, we felt that it would be appropriate to have the actuary do some education on how they develop their fiscal notes and what they actually represent. So those are the items on the potential list related to actuarial topics. So now there's two different lists on organizational administrative. The first list has to do with follow-up from the 2012 work session, which we did last October. Now, I will say off the cuff, there's one of these that I'm have to take off the list. I erroneously included it. It's something you've already dealt with, and that's the stakeholder relationship topic. That was something that you actually dealt with at the work session. The remaining three items, if I can remind you, were we were looking at well, at least two of the three remain. When the board was looking at issues that were important and urgent to them, we had a list of seven different items, or actually 6 different items. And some of the topics that you've already addressed are the administrative committee and how that operates, the stakeholder relationships, our communications plan with members, and the executive director roles and responsibilities. The two that were remaining that you wanted to come back and discuss were the trustee education and a policy. So you had questions about, should we develop a formal policy? Should there be required training? There were some specific issues that you were interested in talking about or bringing up. And refining more the trustee role. So a lot of that discussion would revolve around those types of issues. The board meeting format was an item that came up because there were questions about were these the most effective, the way the meetings were being conducted, were they the most effective use of time? There had been some comments about pushback from employers about how much time members were spending at meetings or on the board. Did we want to discuss the meeting length? Why did we never meet during session? Is that something that should be discussed? And there was discussion about changing the technology that we use in the meetings, and we'll have some more discussion on that in the next presentation. The last item on this list then is a follow-up. Then you did the work session in 2012, and we've put we've kind of hung the question out there about doing another off-site work session in 2013. And if we went off-site, that would move away from the traditional benefit topic discussions. Usually those become more strategic type discussions or whatever other types of information you may want to look at, or team building exercises, or a variety of things, whatever the board would like to discuss. But that is a question about whether or not you want to do another off-site work session this year. A few other things. Now, all these are pretty much all things that are already planned or in the works. Of course, board operating procedure changes we've handled today already. So I guess that one already comes off the list. The paperless board meeting training. One of the items that had been discussed in the last off-site session was this idea about moving to a paperless type process, being able to use electronic notebooks, like the legislature uses the electronic bill book, moving towards that kind of technology. That is something that, based on your input, that we have started moving forward. And we would be ready to roll out the training on the hardware and the software for the board members for your usage as early as July. So it's something for you to consider when you would like to receive training. It probably would be about, I believe, about a half day's worth of training to teach you, to show you the software, teach you how to use it, and how to utilize all the features of it, and get you familiar with it. So whether you would like to spend a part of a board meeting do that, or maybe do something like at the offsite work session, if that would be a good time for that, that's something for you to consider. Some regular updates that we receive from some of our partners with DRS, a couple of presentations we always receive in the summer, is the update on cost-effective management benchmarking. So that's their administrative benchmarking against their peer plans. So we have an update already. They've already committed to doing that in July, and the annual DRS administrative update is already scheduled for July. Board officer elections are also due this year. The time frame for that is normally nominations would be done in August, and elections would happen in September. And it's done in that time frame with the expectation of, or with the possibility of, new board members coming on in July. And the original thought with this schedule was that it would give new board members a chance to get to know some of the existing board members before nominations were made and then elections were done. The last item is the SIB update on the investment side of the house. Although this we were expecting fall, it was going to be determined. At this point, Teresa Whitmarsh, the director for SIB, has committed to doing this in August at this point. So we have it tentatively targeted at August right now. So that is the full list of items that are currently on your interim planning calendar, or at least potentially on your calendar for the next 6 meetings that you have available in this interim. There is a full list in your materials of all these items. So that is for your discussion. I'll be happy to address any questions you may have.
Okay, we wanted to, part of this interim planning is an interactive process here for you to discuss, on the benefits actuarial, how much of this do you want to proceed with? What do we have time within our agenda to proceed with, and with our partners, particularly when it comes to actuarial education, how much time does the Office of State Actuary have to be able to provide that for us? And I think those are questions that we need to discuss here at this level, to discuss whether or not we have time for all of those topics here.
I don't know if you want to go into them in order. These were the benefit ones that Tim brought up. These are all issues that, in one way or another, you are familiar with. One other issue that isn't on the list that came up during session has to do with the salary protection provisions that have been there for the last couple of bienniums for employees who take pay cuts or furloughs in order to help out local. Those provisions expire June 30th. We know there are some left members who are taking those types of cuts for calendar year 2013. I don't know if any of them have already set in place for calendar year 2014 or not, but that would be another potential topic for us to gather information on.
So are you asking us to lay out our agenda, or
Yeah, or
because we've got a couple of lists here, then we've got all the stuff from the state actuary on top of this.
Yeah. So if you took off the 2 items on this list from June, that would leave 5. If you added in the
Protection.
the salary protection, that would be 6. And so the idea would be to talk about those 6 with you now and get some direction from you on whether or not you are interested in kind of pursuing those, getting more information on them, or what your thoughts are. If you have any direction from us, we can move forward. All of these have been topics that you have brought to us. The career change one, though, is newer. That was not something that was discussed last interim. The other ones, including salary protection, were topics that came up last interim and were either deferred to this interim or kind of carryovers from, like, the corrections legislation. For instance, on the corrections legislation, just by way of example, the idea was maybe there are pros and cons. Instead of Healthcare Authority and the Left 2 Board doing a bill and the Select Committee doing a separate bill and the perhaps DRS, what if all the different agencies did try to do one bill? And so you're only then trying to get one hearing scheduled, one bill pulled through rules. Would that facilitate things during the legislative process, or maybe would it make it more, one bill become too cumbersome? Again, here the last several sessions, none of us have had much success getting these types of bills through the legislative process. You mentioned earlier, Glenn, the SCPP bill, request bill, no fiscal note, still didn't get passed. HCA L2B teamed up on a corrections bill, got it out of the House, no interest in getting it pulled through Senate rules. Again, no cost, good government type stuff, but where, when there's, sometimes it's just the focus is on the budget and there's no real attention, they don't want to work on those little things. Maybe if everybody partnered together on one, we'd have a better chance of getting the bill through. I don't know. But it'd be something that, if you're okay with it, what we would do is begin exploring that idea with the staff for the Select Committee and the Department of Retirement Systems. Another agency that's not on there is the Board of Volunteer Firefighters. They had that necessary correction for reserve police officers. That hasn't made it into legislation yet. If we teamed up on something, would that make it easier or harder? I don't know. But if you're okay with it, if you as a board are okay with it, we'd begin exploring this idea with the other agencies to see if they have any interest in it or not, and or if we'll end up having to do our own corrections bill or consider our own corrections bill in December.
Okay, given that guidance from you or that suggestion, and then the other 5 that are viable, is there any of those you don't recommend as staff that we pursue? Because it seems to me they're all pretty relevant.
Well, that's why we brought them up, is they are all topical, they are all relevant, they are all one way or another that's going to end up in your, either for your associations or, you're going to end up it's just, do you want us to, work on them or not?
I want you to. I don't care. I mean, I'm just me. What do you guys think?
Yeah, Steve, for these, where would we be in the process if we were to say, I mean, is this register? Is that the level where you're asking, or are these already at that register level and we're asking for educational briefings? Is that what we're doing?
Yeah. These are all, some of these you've already even had educational briefing or this would be more follow-up. The only one that you haven't had any introduction to at all is the career change one, because that's just emerging.
So if we were to follow with Glenn's suggestion here and say we have these 6 items, and we were to ask you to proceed,
Right.
is that, do you have the capacity?
All 6 of them, I would say at this
For
time.
follow-up?
Yeah, at this time, I would say yes.
Okay.
Although then the idea is this will be that'll make for a very full interim for you
We can
guys.
take that
Not
one
only for
question
us,
off the
but
table about how long our meetings are.
the,
Heck.
that is part of it. The more topics you guys take on, our staff capacity, we've got good people, and again, this is all stuff we've been working on, so we can do this for you, but we're going to be keeping you busy then, as far as meetings go.
Okay.
All right.
Any objection to proceeding with follow-up on
How
these
about
6
a-
items?
I move that we move ahead on the 6 topics that Steve mentioned, especially paying attention to his caveat about corrections legislation.
Is Jack still here?
No.
No, he
He had
checked
to-
out.
All
at
right,
11.
yeah, we won't have
Why
a
can't we do a
quorum.
motion?
We can't do a motion without a quorum. However, with the exception of career change, these are all items you've already directed us to, so we don't really need so much a motion. And career change, we probably wouldn't be ready to bring back to you in July anyway. So what we'll probably do is move forward on scheduling these and begin working on these. And to the extent that we need a motion from you at the July meeting to approve where they all slot into the interim agenda, we'll kind of have a rough interim agenda, if you will, for you in July, and you can vote on it then. Does that sound fair?
Steve, with regard to corrections legislation, as we do follow-up, we'll have more specificity about,
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah.
not that broad as,
Right.
okay.
So for instance, like healthcare did a presentation to the board last year about the corrections that they were seeking. We never had a presentation from the select committee on the return to work bill that they were seeking. But if that was all going to get rolled into one bill, you'd be briefed on all the pieces in the bill, not just the left 2 pieces.
Okay. So we've got a consensus here about the benefits piece, but actuarial, so how do we fall, again,
The one thing
considering
that
capacity
it-
for,
it doesn't require any kind of motion. You will be doing long-term economic assumptions
Yes.
this interim because that's in statute. It may not turn into much. That's based on the recommendation of the state actuary. Given the fact that you just recently adopted the changes that the state actuary recommended to the long-term economic assumptions, it's possible, if not probable, that he won't be recommending any changes. But we'll find out that in when we get feedback from the actuary later on this year. The other 3 educational ones, there is not capacity at the state actuary to do all 3 of these for you. So if I were to, I'd say pick one. If one of those 3, which one of those 3 interests you the most? If none of them do, then we'll punt them back. But if there is something you'd like to talk about a little bit further, I'd say pick one of those 3, and then we'll move forward with OSA in terms of trying to get that on your agenda based on their availability.
at the risk of sounding like Steve Nelson, I'm interested in all 3.
You're a good board.
Yeah.
When I tell people the amount of work that you guys do on actuarial issues, especially when I'm talking to other boards around the country, they are amazed. They think we've got a different breed of police officers and firefighters in this state. So you guys are to be commended for that. But
Even
as much
excited.
as
Excited.
much
I might even be excited, Steve,
as
for all
much
3.
as that might please you, it simply can't be done, Mr. Chair. We're going to have to spread that out over time. But all 3 of them are topics that you have expressed interest in, you as a board have expressed interest in. The smoothing method is something that was established in statute before the board existed. The actuarial funding method is something where you as a board have adopted a temporary deviation from the aggregate funding method. You're using the entry-age normal method as a temporary basis. So it'd be like, well, what would be the pros and cons of just switching to that method permanently? You're still 4 years out from the end of your current temporary period. The
Right.
fiscal note pricing is simply one that's come up in terms of the fiscal note focuses on the benefit change rather than the whole plan, and so sometimes the benefit, for instance, that specifically led to this when you guys discussed it had to do with the catastrophic disability. There was a fiscal note that showed a cost from the catastrophic disability, and then after the bill passed, there was a report from the actuary showing that because the catastrophically disabled members had a shorter lifespan, now the rates could be lowered for the plan because they weren't, yeah. So it was like, should some of this information be included in the fiscal note or not? Or that was where initially that topic came from. I don't know how, there's not any big benefit improvements on the interim agenda, so that one may not be timely, if you will, in terms of looking on that one. Maybe the funding method or the smoothing method would be more timely, although there's not any legislative pressure. There's certainly no legislative pressure to change the smoothing method. There has been, over the last couple of bienniums prior to this, a lot of legislative questions or concern or lack of information about the entry-age normal method and how the board was using that to set rates. But that hasn't been the case, at least with this budget, this session.
I have a suggestion, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Glenn.
Because the actuary's office, I'm kind of looking at you as I say this, so jump up and throw something at me if I get it wrong. I know they have pretty ready-to-go presentations on funding method and smoothing method. And I don't know about the fiscal note piece, but is that about right? Yeah, I've seen it a couple times, so I know somebody's done something like it. What I was thinking is, if we're gonna have a busy schedule anyway, and the actuary's agreeable to it, maybe what we can do is try to fit that in as we go along and not have to, I mean, I don't see that we're gonna not get our work done if we
So
don't get
the
these.
compromise between pick one and do them all is pick two, maybe, and see if OSA
And see if you can
could
fit
do
them in.
two?
I wouldn't even make it I wouldn't put a bullet on having to have it this time around if we can't fit it in, but they're all interesting. And I don't know about the fiscal note. That would be different, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess if we could pick the top two there and try to get them in, I'm guessing the actuaries can do that.
I can ask, and then if not, we'll come back at the July meeting and bring it up again.
What do you think, Mr. Chair?
I agree. If you could ask the question, and
Okay?
we won't have one of these ready to go for the next meeting, right?
I don't think so.
Could we?
I'll check. We follow up with OSA after every board meeting to plan for what could be available. They're working on their off-year evaluation and on their economic experience study, but I'll try to figure out what, if anything, could be done for July.
Okay. All right, then if we move along to the organizational administrative piece, are there any,
The two big questions for you guys are, what do you want to do about an off-site meeting this year and paperless board meeting? So those are sort of the two decision points. The paperless board meeting came up in our discussions with a number of you during the board expectations, and a number of you had suggestions about moving to the legislative model for how board meetings, or using more technology. Come up with an electronic notebook, for instance, instead of the binders, and there is quite a bit of stuff out there. So we have been, and by we, I mean Tammy, has been really taking the lead, but with Tim, and putting together a package for you guys of replacing the notebooks with an electronic tablet, putting more information out there. It may increase the ability for members to attend meetings without being physically here. It may, in the down the road, lead to more information or different type of information being able to be put out on the web. But at least initially, it's simply to facilitate the meetings. Updates would all be electronic. You wouldn't be getting handouts at the meeting and so forth. The city of Tukwila has recently moved to the same product that we'll be bringing to you. So it's something that the board member David Klein is familiar with.
So it's an actual application?
Yeah, yeah. Novus Agenda, I think, is the actual software, and we'll be running it off of, I think, iPad tablets.
Correct.
And so there'd be.
That's similar to what SIB does already?
Very similar,
Okay.
yes.
It's not that,
They've got a different program, and we consulted with them in terms of their experience using Board Doc, and based on their experience and our own analysis, decided that Novus Agenda would be a much better way to go.
okay.
So one of the things would be finding training time. So for instance, if you decided to do a offsite, where normally we talk about expectations and stuff, like the last time it was a full day meeting, perhaps part of that offsite could be done doing the training. Otherwise, we'd have to fit it in at one of your regular meetings. For instance, the next one would be July. And so we'd schedule training next month as part of your board meeting. You'd be getting the hardware and some training on the software. So those are kind of the two questions where we need some, do you want to do another offsite this year? And how quickly do you want to start implementing the paperless agenda?
Any comments?
Yes. It's a step in the right direction.
I'm telling you, it all comes from you. The outreach to all of you, there were several board members who recommended this stuff. That process has really worked well. Tim will talk about it in his presentation here about the board member expectations. That process drove a lot of very positive change. We exist to serve you, and gaining that additional clarity about what it is that you wanted and how we could better serve you has really helped us. And again, staff's energized. We're jazzed to do this, so it's worked out well. It's been a very productive process.
And I will assume that we will, if we say yes to an off-site work session, you'll start the planning, location, agenda, all that. And then paperless board meeting, I think we start the training as soon as we can. I mean, it's not that difficult, and if the SIB's program is not as user-friendly as the one that you've adopted, it'll be even easier. It's not that difficult.
Yeah. All right. We'll plan on including that on the agenda then for July.
Okay?
And we'll look at an off-site for the same kind of time frame as last year, which was September, October. Yeah, October. Thank you, Tammy. And look to finding a place and kind of putting together some ideas for you for an agenda for that as well.
Okay. Any other comments, requests, or suggestions? Okay. Does that give you enough there, Mr. Director?
Yeah, those were the two where we needed some direction. The other ones were sort of already in the. Now there were three of the kind of topics: trustee education, stakeholder relationship, board meeting format. What we'll probably do is bring those up at the offsite. Kind of go again, use the offsite to talk about expectations and dig into those as a part of that agenda.
Okay.
And we'll put all of your feedback today into a rough interim plan, if you will, and have that for you at the next meeting on iPads.
How does that effectively work then? The board provides iPads for the trustees?
Yeah, yeah. The equipment's already been purchased, the software's already, we're good to go, so it's just finding the time for you guys to be trained.
Okay. Any other questions for Tim before we move on to the next subject? All
Which is
right,
also Tim.
which is also Tim. Item number 3, board expectations.
Oh, great. Again, for the record, Tim Valencia, Deputy Director for the Board. I guess we were at the agenda item formerly known as number 3. This is a board member expectations check-in. Of course, Steve's already discussed the work that we did with obtaining board member expectations during 2012, and as you'll recall, we went through extensive interviews with all the board members and then started doing a lot of work at the off-site session. And the key to that work is making sure that we'd captured all your expectations and then clearly understood your expectations. The purpose of this meeting now is to just check in with you to make sure that the work that we're doing is correctly reflecting those expectations and that we're doing the things that you want. And again, that you're our primary customers, and so success for us is meeting or exceeding your expectations. So it's important for us to be very clear on what you want and how well we're doing that so that we can support your mission for the board members or for the members and our stakeholders. And again, this is our chance to get feedback from you to make sure that we're on the right track. So that's the key thing that we're looking for from you today is feedback. So just in review, you recall that when we started talking about expectations, that this really is it's a development type process. We've already gone through that process of asking you what you wanted, what you expected, and defining those expectations. We're now on the right side of this model where we're getting, we've gotten some feedback from you. We've worked on making process improvements. Now we're going back through this feedback process, and as we continue to do improvements, and ultimately those will give us the opportunity, both as an organization and as a board, to recognize significant accomplishments that we have. But this is a continuous cycle, and this is something that we'll use to continually drive innovation and excellence for this board. So as you recall, that there were 7 expectations that were defined by you. The primary one was to, of course, responsibly govern the plan. The other expectations included helping you as board members get up to speed, or helping new board members get up to speed, keeping you informed, supporting your policies, educating the stakeholders and the plan members, and providing professional support, and of course helping you make responsible decisions in governance of the plan. So responsibly govern the plan. This is the supporting this goal is was voiced as one of the primary expectations for the board members. As you recall, that during the offsite session, we had you guys do a little survey about how we were doing at that time about meeting your expectations. This is one where there was actually fairly high level of satisfaction. You'll note the rating at the bottom. Out of a scale of 5, you had rated us as high as 4.1. So a fairly good level of expectation, but still there's always room for improvement. Things that you said here that were key in terms of what you meant by responsibly govern the plan was keeping the public and people informed, helping guard against misunderstandings about the plans, making sure people understood the facts and figures about the plans, the information about the plan, and then also helping you, identify issues and strategies for good governance and addressing problems with the plan. So some of the things that some of the actions that we've taken, and you'll note that some of these actions will repeat on multiple expectations, that oftentimes we were looking for things that were, looking at meeting expectations. We were looking for things that cut across a broader scope of expectations. For example, some of the actions taken, Steve recently presented on a national stage to NC PERS about good practices in transforming public pensions and how you think, and I think it was how you think, talk, walk, act, chew on public pensions. But it was a well-received presentation on a national stage. One of the keys to that was they got to talk about Washington, and in particular Left Plan 2, and the things that have been done well by this board, and talk about the successes of this plan. And that's part of that, building the credibility of the board, and the plan is part of helping you responsibly govern the plan, getting that message out, which is one of the things we talked about. We've also, as you noticed, we've increased the research capacity on the board with the addition of with Paul here, and of course we've had Ryan who was also doing at the time research as an intern for us, and of course Greg's still on staff, but. Overall, our research capacity has increased by one person, so we have more availability to be able to address issues for the board. And of course, what cuts across almost all of these is implementing the paperless board meeting solution. This is a solution that, one, is more cost effective. We're getting rid of all the paper. It's much more efficient in terms of getting information to you, getting updates to you. The software itself is going to make the process more transparent as far as people's accessibility to the information, being able to track the voting on issues, and it may even lead to some advanced capabilities, including video and virtual participation. So these are all things that should improve the board meeting process and governance of the plan. So number two, help us get up to speed. The key thing that we have undertaken on this, based on the things that we heard from you in your discussion about this item, is that we redesigned the orientation manual. We'll be looking to bring that out or roll that out next month and provide everybody copies of that. And ultimately, now that we'll go to a paperless opportunity, rather than having to get a paperless manual, we'll even be able to access the information online. Based on the feedback that we've gotten, things that we've changed in the manual is that we've taken a different approach with presenting the strategic plan and goals to give more information about that. We've increased the history of pensions in Washington, the history of Left Plan 2 as a plan, so we've increased that plan information. We've increased the amount of information that includes the ethics rules that you're subject to, public records, open public meetings, so a lot of those administrative things. We've added more information about fiduciary responsibility and training. We've done this with an eye of streamlining the manual to make it more user-friendly as actually be a resource rather than some volume you have to hunt for. So it's with that eye of being more efficient for you to be able to utilize. Wait, just lost that thought. So, but anyways, and the last thing that we've added, one of the things we added that was missing from the manual was an administrative section that includes a lot more information which will be useful for new trustees in terms of what to expect when they come in and making sure they understand what the roles and responsibilities are, the things, more information about some of the actuarial pieces that they have to make decisions on, and then also just the basic operational stuff about how meetings are conducted, what to expect when you come into your first meeting, just even how the flow of a meeting goes, and also then how to go about getting travel reimbursements and the forms and the basic information. Those were always there, but they were in disparate packages from the manual itself. So we tried to incorporate this all into a very good user-friendly package, which should help get people up to speed a lot quicker. The other thing that you guys had mentioned was the information from the AG's office, which for the most part, I think every board member had a meeting with the AGs when they first started about open public meetings and ethics and those things. One of the things that we're doing to address the request for more information there is we've scheduled a refresher. So Don will be doing a presentation for the whole board. I believe we have the schedule for next month to go back over that information and make sure everybody feels like they're, for new members coming up to speed, and a reminder for everybody else. For keeping us informed, this was an area that, the discussion was that you always wanted to be fully informed when you were considering policy issues at the boards. The one area where you had expressed a desire for more information actually was around more administrative type issues, and it's an area where I would say that you guys felt that not all your needs were being met because of there was a lack of information flow. So the rating here being at 3.1 on a scale of 5. So some types of things that we have done to try and improve the level of information that you're receiving. We have increased the email notifications of when we've gone out to meet with stakeholders, and that also includes making sure that everybody receives all the presentations and that you're aware of the information that's being shared with stakeholder groups. We've made sure that we've sent out email notifications about various staff changes as they're occurring on the administrative side. Again, implementing the paperless board meeting solution will increase the velocity of when you receive the information. In particular, we'd had comments about not receiving a bunch of updates when you arrive at the meeting. Well, the paperless solution should help eliminate that because we'll be able to automatically update the electronic formats of these materials. Because we sent out several notifications about what was going on during the legislative session this year. And we've also initiated the usage of social media. In particular, the Left Board does have a Twitter account, which is at L2B. If you're not already on Twitter, if you're inclined to use Twitter, you can follow us. And we do have followers. We've been trying to use that as a way of improving information out to members as well, but it can be a way for getting information out to you. So, for example, we were also tweeting out what was going on with legislative information, in particular as it relates to the board. But we've been able to send out information to members about just retirement planning and retirement education. We've tweeted out things that our stakeholders are doing. We've tweeted out several things that DRS has sent out or pieces of information that have been put out. So I know we've tweeted out information about our board meetings, like in this case, this board meeting was about to happen. So in the future, that's an area where we hope to expand the usage for informing both board members and plan members and stakeholders. One of the other things that we did is that we redesigned the legislative webpage this year. Tammy has some skills that far exceeded mine when I was running the legislative page. It's much easier to use, much easier to look up the information and follow the information. It's much more compact and user-friendly. So we have done some work there, and also not only the legislative page, but we did also update the main page so that anything that we do put on Twitter, actually there's a running log on the main page that shows all the information that we're tweeting out, and also we updated or added an area for current news and updated news and information. So we've improved the information that's being provided out on the website as well. Supporting our policy decisions. So this is one where the board expects the policy decisions and their recommendations to the legislature to be supported by us, the staff, both to the legislature and to other state agencies. And although you considered the policy decisions to be, very successful and well supported, there had been questions about how that was being done at the time. And some important clarifications that we've gotten along the way that have been very useful are expectations such as that that once the board has taken an action, even if it's a split decision, that it's still that we would support that board action. For example, the director's responsibility when we're requested for drafting legislation. So those types of actions were products that came out of this discussion and that have improved our ability to support your decisions. There's an area where you already expressed a high level of satisfaction, scoring us at 4.3. And things that you were looking for out of us continually was objective testimony, supporting the board decisions on previous rules, and making sure that everybody had full distribution of handouts, that there wasn't selective distribution of handouts, whether by any form of design, and doing further work out at the national level. As I mentioned, Steve already presenting out at NC PERS, going on to that national stage to talk about what the board has accomplished. So other things that we've done to help support the decisions, as Paul already talked about, that we did a lot of background research and provided a lot of information regarding House Bill 1868 to help its passage, which was in support of the board's previous policy decision to provide catastrophic disability medical coverage. Steve did testify on that Health Care Authority Board when it was in committee, which was supported out of this board. And even we also, as staff, went to represent the board and its role at the bill signing for House Bill 1868. So we're always continually looking for ways to support the things that the board is moving forward. Educating the plan stakeholders. Of course, this includes a lot of people, including the plan members, employers, legislators, even the public and the board members itself, and making sure that everybody understands what the board itself is doing. This is an area where we've had a lot of success, but you felt that there were a lot of areas we could improve even further. Specifically, you talked about opportunities to use technology more to deliver additional information. So again, with those thoughts in mind, you had rated us at 3.7, so clearly we had some room to improve. So we've done a lot of work in this area. We've done a lot of work with the stakeholder outreach. We've been to several stakeholder legislative conferences, both on the law enforcement and the fire side, along with also with their membership and educational conferences. We went up and for the first time spoke with the King County City administrators. We've continued the work to make sure that we are producing our newsletters with relevant content. We've, of course, initiated the social media, as I've already mentioned, with Twitter, which has been a key area for being able to provide additional educational opportunities. The redesign of work with the web, again, which goes all towards providing additional education. And we've especially increased the amount of useful information in terms of broader education pieces with web postings and links that we've put on the website. Several different broad articles that we've put out to place, and those I think I've detailed out in the report itself. And again, part of educating the paperless board meeting is going to help us educate the board members or the stakeholders easier, because we're going to have easier access to information. And again, part of that may be giving them mechanisms for even attending meetings without having to actually physically be there. So again, all of those types of elements are going to work towards educating the stakeholders. Of course, in providing professional administrative support, you guys rely on us to make sure that the meetings happen and in a efficient, professional manner. So you guys had expressed a high level of satisfaction with the meetings and the facilities. and you had expressed confidence that the agency was being run very well. With that satisfaction, you would rate it as high at 4.5. But we're always looking for ways that we can improve the administrative side of the house. So again, the paperless board meeting, that's going to have advantages for us as staff as well. It's going to streamline our processes significantly, and we'll have significant cost savings, or expected to have significant cost savings because of reduced time in preparing the packets, making copies for the packets, distributing the packets. It's going to be a lot more efficient for us. Again, we've increased the staff that we have, so we have more capacity to be here to answer your questions and provide information to you. Behind the scenes, we've streamlined the accounting and travel reimbursement processes. It was in a cooperative effort with the Department of Enterprise Services that everything was being done manually through the mail as far as the sharing of information to get your reimbursements processed. We've now gone to an electronic process, which should or will completely decrease some of the processing time and get reimbursements done more quickly. And we've also continued to update our own internal administrative procedures to make sure that we're staying on top. We're taking opportunities to improve our procedures to make the agency operate more quickly. And again, we're always looking for ways to improve the reports process, and whether that's changes like what we already talked about today, or as we develop information, we're always looking at reports produced in other sectors and other areas, looking for ways to improve the information being communicated. One of the things that you will see that we've added this year or that we're planning to add on the benefit issues, and I think it was on some of these reports this time, is a strategic linkage. We want to stay focused on your strategic plan and your expectations. So we'll be documenting in the physical reports how these items tie to your strategic plan, because that's what we're supposed to be working on. So we're going to make sure that we don't lose track of those items, and make sure that we're working towards that strategic plan. And then lastly, assist us in making responsible decisions. So of course, you as board members want to make responsible decisions for the plan. It's important to the credibility of the board and the effectiveness of the board. There was, at the time this discussion was happening, there were some uncertainties about the future, a lot of with the economic possibilities and what would happen legislatively, what would happen with funding. So it's the board members, obviously they seek us out for good guidance and good counsel in terms of areas of plan governance, and you rely on our expertise. So, and that's an area that you express a desire to continue that kind of reliance in terms of the information and the education that is necessary for you to make good decisions. So it's an area where you felt that we were doing a good job and rated 4.2 on the scale in this area. Specific items that you mentioned in this is making sure materials were timely and making sure that there were opportunities for trustee education, that we had presentations from our stakeholders like OSA and DRS, and doing everything we can to improve the decision-making process, like with the reports, and furthering a culture of open discussion. So you see all the things that we've put up there, which are ones that, again, cut across many areas, but we've worked to improve the process for the reports, and we've redesigned that orientation manual to increase information that you receive, that board members receive up front, and the paperless board meeting and the increased staff are all going to be solutions that will help us help you. So wrapping up, next steps, again, clarity regarding expectations on an ongoing basis is the key for us being able to serve you and help you, reach your mission. So what we're looking to you for discussion-wise is, are these types of actions, are the things that we've already done and that are doing, are we meeting your expectations? Are we doing the types of steps, the things that you were expecting us to do? When we had this conversation last October, are these the type of actions that are moving towards improving those scores? have any of your expectations changed? This is that check-in point of, it's a different time now. Have expectations changed, or has anything new emerged for you as board members? And then looking forward, there will be a future evaluation. We have to go back and we will actually do resurvey you and see how we're doing against the expectations. This is just our opportunity to keep you up to date on what we've done so far and where we're headed. And at the next time, and which may be an item in the next work session, a chance for us to ask you again how we're doing, check back in, and go back through this process. So, anyways, that is the end of my remarks.
One of the things that we did last year was go out and meet with each of you individually prior to the work session. And we intend to do that again and continue that. So we'll be, for at least most of you, talk.
Come down to Springfield.
So we'll be doing that between now and the offsite October, working to schedule those kind of check-ins with you again out at your homes to talk about the issues that Tim. Now, again, there's if there is something pressing that you wanted to talk about now, this would be the time. Otherwise, the plan would be to talk about those one-on-one and then again as a group in the work session in October. All right.
The excitement is palpable, Steve. So we're going to have to take a break before we get right into that administrative update. And I think lunch is ready.
Yes.
So would you be ready about 12:10 to do the update?
You bet. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we will be recessed for about 20 minutes.
You should have seen this guy snap around.
And we'll proceed with Steve's administrative update, and then we'll go over agenda items for future meetings, and then if there's any other business.
As far as administrative items, first up, the Select Committee on Pension Policy. They have also been canceling all their meetings during the session, and including their June meeting. So they have not had a meeting yet this year. One change, though, that I wanted to mention, there was a suggestion that it might improve coordination between the Select Committee and the Left 2 Board if they had regular updates from Left 2 Board staff about your activities. And so I was asked if I'd be willing to talk with them at their July and October meetings about what you guys are doing. And I said I would. Their agenda and that hasn't been confirmed because they haven't met yet to.
But they asked us?
It was more a staff discussion. We were kind of brainstorming different ways to improve coordination. It was a little bit challenging, for instance, on the excess comp bill. Last year, it came up late. They had a meeting on it, and then there was an amended bill that ended up coming to you guys before their committee had saw it, and even by the time it came to you guys at the December meeting, nobody even knew for sure Senator Bailey had seen it and supported it yet. So we were talking about the challenges in coordination, and that was one of the things. I know Senator Schessler has expressed interest in improving coordination between the two bodies. So that was one idea that we came up with. I try to give you regular updates as far as what they're working on. What I will do this interim is I give you a full agenda so that you can see everything that's on there, and it's not just me trying to filter what I think may or may not be relevant to left two, but you can see the full agenda, and if there's something on there that piques your interest for whatever reason, then we can be prepared to discuss it and how it may or may not be appropriate for coordination. But that's one new initiative, is having your agenda sort of before them on a regular basis with me there to answer questions. We'll see if that helps coordination. You mentioned earlier, Glenn, and you know, in the admin meeting, for instance, that 401A DC sidecar issue. That could apply to all the plans. The salary protection, that's typically a bill that applies to all the plans. So there's at least a couple items right out of the chute that could be coordinated between the two bodies. The salary protection coordination from 2 years ago did not go well. That was an area where Senator Schessler expressed some frustration about the need for better coordination on that issue. So we'll see. The DRS update, one of the things that I wanted to let you guys know, first off, I'm sure you've heard, Marcy Frost, the deputy, is the director now at DRS. They have implemented a number of really cutting-edge business improvements over at DRS over the last several years. And Marcy is being asked to expand the implementation of some of these topics by being asked by the governor to other agencies. So in addition to her new role as director, she's got these responsibilities from the governor, and she's also on the State Investment Board. She's very busy. But one of the things that they are also doing at DRS is reorganizing the way they deliver services. That's a kind of a spin-off of the business mapping thing that one of the initiatives that she's taking out to other agencies. And so, for instance, in the past, there was a LEOFF unit with a LEOFF administrator and a group of staff that was specifically focused on only LEOFF customers. Now there's customer service staff, and they might be answering the same kind of questions, but they would be answering them for teachers and public employees and LEOFF members. So there are, the way we as staff here kind of interact with the department is slightly different now, depending on the kinds of issues that come up. But the relationship between the agencies is still as positive as it has been. Marcy will be doing an administrative update to the board later on this interim, and that's one of the things I'm sure she can talk about more in detail. But let's see, the budget report. There's two things I wanted to talk about. First off, we're coming up on the end of the biennium. The spreadsheet is in there, and you can see where we're at. We're, again, well under budget for the biennium, more under this biennium than we have been even in the past, primarily because of leaving the deputy position vacant for a period of time, and then those savings we were able to use to fund some of the other initiatives that we got done this biennium. However, all of that good news ends in about 2 weeks. Everything that if the agencies underfund, monies aren't spent, they don't carry forward to the next biennium. So come July 1, we're starting over at zero.
What do you mean? They're going to do a zero-based budget exercise on you, or you're
Yeah,
saying?
yeah, we do that. Yeah, every year we kind of start over with our, we reset our biennial budget. So the positive variance that we've had goes away. So we're back.
So your baseline goes down to whatever you spent, not what you had budgeted?
No, it's back what we had allocated. It's just the $300 and some thousand variance that we've accrued over the last 24 months. That's not available anymore. So come July 1, my variance will be 0.
Well, right, you've got
Yeah.
turn back, but you're not going to get your baseline kicked.
No.
Okay.
No, we're good there. We've been working with OFM to get our new budget, new allocations set up. The 3% salary cut for state employees has been funded. That ends June 30th, and the House and Senate budgets have included funding for that additional 3% return throughout, so that'll be reflected in our budget beginning July 1. The other issue, though, I did want to mention with the budget is the fact that if there is no operating budget approved by the legislature by July 1, what does that mean? You guys have been probably reading in the paper about the possibility of a shutdown. All agencies were required to go through an exercise with OFM. Our agency is not an appropriated agency. The funds come out of the Left to Retirement Fund. We get our allocations from OFM, but we don't receive a legislative appropriation. That was one of 4 categories that the governor's office is considering continuing in the event even if there is a shutdown. So, but at this point in time, we've just been required to provide information to OFM. We have not received any direction from them yet what positions, if any, would continue on July 1 if there isn't a budget. All expectations are that the budget, the revenue forecast that came out yesterday will provide a little bit of extra revenue, and that'll help spur, there's no other information now to wait on. They have all that's out there, and hopefully be able to wrap things up before July 1. I'll give you guys an update as soon as I hear something from OFM regarding whether we will or won't be open, particularly it could go down to the wire. When I was working for the Senate in '91, the legislature didn't pass a budget until June 29th. That's the latest that they've ever gone. Hopefully we won't be breaking any records this year, but they're still working on things, so we'll see. I'll keep you informed in terms of whether or not a shutdown will affect the agency. There were a couple of staffing issues that I wanted to talk about just briefly. Tammy graduated from WSU since the last time we met. She's been working on that, getting her degree while doing her job here at the board. So I wanted to mention that. Diane Schwickerath, she is a very accomplished legislative employee who graciously agreed to come back and work with us during session part-time. And hopefully, maybe if we have the budget for it, and if she has the continued willingness, she might be able to come back and do some more work for us again next session, or perhaps later this fall. She's been really invaluable. Worked out really well. Getting somebody of her quality is that's the ideal of how those retire-rehire bills are supposed to work, where you can find somebody who's really good, who wants to come back to work part-time to help fund their vacation fund. It's a win-win for everybody. Tim mentioned earlier about increasing the board's legal research capacity. Although she's not an employee of the board, Dawn has, since joining or becoming our support, has joined the National Association of Public Pension Attorneys and has been attending their legal education conferences. So we're sucking her into the pension community more and more every month. Thank you for that. The outreach activities, briefly, WACOPS had their annual conference last week. I went out there just for one day to kind of talk about Tim's session interim preview and the legislative update that you got today, kind of go over those items and answer any questions. The only real new thing that kind of came out of that, I'll be doing by the way, a similar thing next week. The State Council of Firefighters is having their annual conference up in SeaTac, and they'll be talking about their issues. One thing that came up at WACOPS has to do with board membership. Ryan has, you all got a copy of his letter. This is Ryan's last meeting. I wanted to personally thank you for coming today. We would not have had a quorum if you hadn't have been here, and there are a lot of board members, for other boards maybe, but there are a lot of people who wouldn't have done what you did today. So thank you very much. I appreciate it personally, in addition to being able to accomplish the board business. Ryan's moving on to greener pastures in Oregon personally, but again, I was hoping that you'd have some positive takeaways from today's meeting when you heard some of your feedback to the board member expectations and kind of seeing them come to life, if you will. Your influence won't be gone just because you're gone. For other organizations who are perhaps interested, I know the Association of Washington Cities, David Klein's position is up. They've already been working with the governor's office on.
Keith Klein's not here anymore?
No, his position's up, but they're asking for him to be reappointed.
Oh, okay.
And so they've been working on that. I don't know what what organizations are out there as far as names being submitted to fill the law enforcement spot that'll be vacant come July, or where fire is at on the fire spot that'll be vacating. But let me know if there's anything that we can do to help in those efforts. Mainly there were a lot of questions from WACOPS about what is the process, again, for submitting a name.
We were thinking that, David and I were thinking that, since y'all work for cities and counties, we'll just take over for you.
Well, there's been times where we've actually been in agreement on things.
It happens. It happens. I mean, it could work.
Well, I would ask that you at least call me first before you head a certain direction, so I can give you some consultation and advice.
Okay.
I'll tell you, one of the things, when I was at doing the presentation at NC PERS, one of the things I talked about in terms of how were you guys so successful? What were you doing in Washington that was different from what they were doing, and how is that working? And one of the things is by having these monthly meetings, I remind them when I remember being staff for the legislature and having the representatives of police and fire come to the legislature saying, we need to split LEOFF into two plans. We can't agree anymore. And what you have found, partly by this monthly meeting process, is a lot of common ground. The rivalry, the friendly rivalry between police and fire in Washington, I think, really is friendly. In other states, not quite as much. And I think by that inability to work together is part of what sets them back. And with the employer community, the same dynamic has developed. You have found common ground on issues. You may not find common ground on every issue, but on those issues where you do have employers, police, and fire all united, you've been extraordinarily successful. I know when the board was first created, the employer community in general did not support the creation of the board, and there was even some discussion about whether or not they wanted to submit names to fill the appointments. And I appreciate the fact that they have told me they are so glad now that they did, and it's worked out much different than their fears. And I mentioned it earlier, talking to the King County administrators, now they'd like to copy what they've done here for LEOFF, and can you guys do that for PERS too? So that your good work, usually it doesn't get recognized in Washington. I get more people recognizing what you've accomplished from, say, California than Olympia. They've got a lot of plans in California that are not doing quite so well. They see how successful you've been. When the national studies are done about funding ratios, for instance, Washington in general always ranks in the top 10%, and Left Plan 2 usually ranks up in the top 1% of plans around the country. That's a tribute to the work that you've done and your ability to find common ground on issues that affect all of you, like rate stability, for instance. So I get a lot of satisfaction just sitting back and kind of watching you guys do these things. And then I love going out and talking to other people about using you as an example of, police and fire can get along, and employees and employers can get along. And when they do, it works. So it's not a question of will it work, it has worked. You guys have demonstrated it. There's a lot of skeptics out there about defined benefit plans in general. You have provided a perfect example of how a well-managed, well-designed defined benefit plan can benefit not just the plan members, but the employers as well. Every one of the billions of dollars that the State Investment Board earns is $1 billion that employers don't have to pay in compensation. Speaking of the State Investment Board, one other item I wanted to mention is that Board Chair Kelly Fox is also now a newly appointed member of the State Investment Board, which should facilitate coordination between the LEF 2 Board and the State Investment Board in the future. They will, I chuckle because I can see more actuarial presentations, for instance, on the agenda of the SIB in the future. But with that, those were a couple of other quick items. Then one other quick item for the admin update is the October meeting. That's where we have planned the off-site work session. That meeting conflicts with this year's annual conference for the International Foundation of Employee Benefit Plans. And I know that is that's on the pre-approved list of trustee education. It's a conference that both staff and trustees have attended at different times in the past. It's a very good conference, but it does conflict with the October meeting this year. So for those of you who were thinking about attending that, I'd like to touch bases with you about that conflict, just to make sure that we don't end up with quorum issues or something with the October meeting. Perhaps when we get closer, if that becomes more of an issue, we can talk about rescheduling October. But I just wanted to give you a heads up.
Is there, since we're off-site, we don't have to worry about this location, correct?
Right.
So we can look at a week earlier if need be, or?
Possibly, it's more your calendars, so that'd be something that we could send out, start talking with you guys about whether an alternate date rather than October 23rd would fit on your calendars, and then we can find a location. But, and that's reimbursements, not necessarily for now, but maybe we'll bring that to you in July, especially when we have new board members on, and it'll be a good timing as well. Quick reminder, related to the budget, it's the close of the biennium. We need to get your reimbursement requests for travel expenses for this meeting processed quickly, so if you could get those to...
Oh, that's right, we gotta be
Jess.
paid this biennium.
Yeah.
Do we have to have them turned in this biennium?
Yeah, we just needs them by Friday in order to get them processed in time. And she's got the paperwork here if you want to take care of it, what you can this afternoon before you leave. With that, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. But that was the end of my update.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, Ryan accepted here. Mark, are you going to International Foundation?
I plan to.
Probably, yeah. So do I, Jeffrey. So I'd suggest that week before, it's the day before the SIB meeting, the 16th. So as a suggestion, if you want to run that by the board and see if the 16th will be acceptable, I'd appreciate it.
Okay.
Okay. All right, any other questions? Any parting, I'll say words?
Thank you for a great 6 years. It's honestly because of the work of this board since inception that we are rated at the top. Having discussions with our assistant city manager recently, there was some discussion that came up over PERS rates and where they're going, and so I reminded them that left 2 is stable, and there's a reason for that. So hopefully they can take it easy on us when it comes to wage discussions and health insurance benefits. But I mean, seriously, for the staff and everybody, I mean, you guys have been great since day one, and the education piece and everything that we've done as a board has just been tremendous, and the educational opportunities for the trustees. So, like you said, there's a lot of things that you guys are doing because of the discussions we had last year, and it's all a step in the right direction from the gentleman to my left and his flavor for paper. If we're going to be pushing him in a direction he may be uncomfortable with, but as he pulls out his binder and calendar to look at October for dates, I reminded him that it could all be right in the palm of his hand. So it's a step in the right direction, and then where the board's going with the other items that we've discussed as well. I mean, it's as long as we're consistently looking at where we're at and what we could do to be better, this will continue to be one of the top plans in the country, and it's because of the work of everybody that's here. So it's been a pleasure, and thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. Glad to have you here. Okay, any other business to come before the board? Steve, do we have to look at item number 9 at all?
You've got it behind your agenda. There's nothing that needs to be done as far as motions. This was a rough draft. You can see a couple of things that are...
Plus, we already did it, right? I mean, we looked at all those 6 items and stuff.
Yeah, and you can see the things that we've got tentatively booked for July, if you're interested. The only item that got added to July was your paperless training. So with the 6 items that are already on there in the paperless training, we may end up bumping 1 or 2 of those back to August or more to make room for the training. And there were no OSA items on there, so I know you asked me to check and see if an OSA item could get added for August. They're doing the long-term economic assumptions, so we weren't planning on having an educational briefing from them also that month. But we will try to talk with them and see and come back in July with more of a fleshed-out interim agenda for you.
Okay. All right. Any other business? All right, well, thank you, everybody, and we will adjourn until July 24th.